So hello everybody. On behalf of the Foundation for Self-Leadership, I want to welcome all of you to our third panel discussion of the military and IFS. In the first session, we talked mostly about military culture and military training. We at least alluded to the possibility that training and violence might be required in order to deal with violence and injustice that shows up in the world. That kind of training and experience changes people, and it can cause problems for them later. We noted that many therapists are largely unfamiliar with the military, and that unfamiliarity can contribute to a veteran's suspicion and distrust of clinicians. In the second panel discussion, we talked about what's currently offered in the way of help and readjustment in the military and in the VA. And today we want to focus more on what the IFS model specifically has to offer. We're very open to questions or comments that you might have regarding either the military or IFS. Let me say about today's panel, they'll introduce themselves here in a minute, but what I want you to know is that they're basically frontline workers who provide therapy to veterans on a daily basis. They don't travel the lecture circuit or conduct PESI seminars, although I think they easily could. Neither are they getting paid for today's discussion. What is true about them may be true for you as well. Namely, they feel called to this work and to the IFS orientation. They believe in a kind of service that has some commonalities with military service, strange as that probably sounds. And as a group, this panel is offering to you some experience, commitment, reassurance, and I hope some encouragement that self-leadership is a good way to go. Not the only way, but a good way. I would venture that using an IFS approach will bring improvement to your sessions and to your clients' lives. You may already wonder if I'm a little bit off track here, but I want to assure you that this way of thinking about people can also improve your own life. You're important too. Okay, by way of introductions, I'm an Army veteran myself who served as a Russian linguist in a counterintelligence position in the early 70s. I'm also a clinical psychologist and spent a little over 30 years working with combat vets in the VA's Vet Center program. With regard to IFS, I ran into Dick Schwartz in 2001 at a required training program, and basically I've been hooked ever since. Okay, so for the short introduction part of this, Mary, maybe you could say a little bit about yourself and especially with regard to IFS in the military. And then I'll explain a little bit more about today's format, and then we'll move more into the actual program.
Ready to go? Yeah. Hi all. I'm Mary Kruger. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm located in Connecticut. I am part of a pilot program started in 2008-2009 by France Simsick, Vietnam vet, called the Connecticut Military Support Program. They came up with the idea of this program because of folks' confidentiality issues and trust issues around clinicians. So we see people privately, we do triage, and a number of us are embedded in various National Guard units. And I come from a family of veterans, going all the way back to the Civil War. So we'll say more later about that, but it's had a huge impact, on our system and has influenced my desire to work with veterans, active military, and their families. Yeah, so I pass the baton. Yeah.
Thanks, Mary.
Stu, would you like me to introduce myself now too?
Yeah, you're up, Dave.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Baird, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also the director here in Spokane, Washington, at the Vet Center here. Our mission here, as many of you might know, is to work with combat veterans and their family members. We also work with folks who have experienced sexual trauma in the military. And then we are also so privileged to do the sacred work of walking with folks who are grieving the loss of a loved one. that they lost in harm's way. So a little bit about me. I'm retired Navy. I had 4 deployments in my career. I've been a trauma therapist for just over 25 years. I was actually first introduced to IFS in 2006 when I was at a training and Stu Brown walked in and introduced IFS, just a real brief intro. And I found myself weeping in the back of the room, which isn't usually how I roll. And after the training, Stu just made a beeline right back and he just sat with me and said, I know. And what it was is I just so resonated with the model. And I would say that IFS has literally changed my life. It's even changed my spirituality to a large degree. And it has absolutely transformed my work with clients. So for the last 15 years in my trauma work, by far IFS is my go-to model. So it's so great to be here with you today. And I just, folks that are in the audience, I know that you're in the trenches doing the work, and my hope is that we'll have some things to say that'll make your life more meaningful and more effective, and hopefully also just help you with your own self-care as we do this hard work. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave, and especially I appreciate you mentioning my name in such a positive light. I'm not used to hearing that from you, so good show.
I don't know, Stu, you inspired me too.
Okay, well, let's cut the program right here.
Okay.
Oh, thanks all. All right.
Enough of that.
Yeah, I do hope like this is an encouraging program, and that it's more of a conversation. I'm thinking that probably quite a few of you are involved in this work in some way or other, either working for the VA or the vet center, or in your own private practice, and you wouldn't be here, I would imagine, if you weren't interested in some way or other. And probably that we've got some military people in here too. And I just want to say again, we're very interested in your comments or questions. And about the program itself, let me see. With regard to format, let me say the views of the panelists are their own and do not represent an endorsement by the foundation, nor are the panelists, by participating, necessarily endorsing IFS or the mission of the foundation. So as I said, I'm hoping the conversation here is going to be interesting to you, and would encourage you to put your comments or questions in the chat box that's probably down at the bottom of your screen. And we'll be trying to read those and monitor the things as we go along here. We can't see you, but I'm assuming you can see all 3 of us. And we'll try to work in your questions and comments as we go along. Try to be self-led if you would. We would appreciate that. But if you're not, all parts are welcome. So what else here? The only other thing is that if you need to step out for some reason or other, these sessions are being recorded. So you don't have to worry about missing out on something. You can go back and get it on YouTube later. Okay, so having said that, I think, Mary, we're leading off with maybe just a short refresher on what IFS exactly is, how it sort of works, because there may be some people out here that don't have any prior experience with IFS and just dialed in because they're curious about the thing.
Yeah, thanks, Stu. I was trained in the model since 1999, and we just came off a vet center training about a month ago. It was a fantastic training. We had about 33 participants. And so as I'm speaking about it, it may seem a little esoteric, but we were able to really do some like hard application of the model. And we can work in a lot of different ways, which is what I love about this model, and adapt to whatever situation's at hand. There's a lot of flexibility in it, as well as integrate with other stuff that you're probably trained in. Sometimes people have some parts up around, I had to learn a whole new thing. And what about all the stuff I learned? So I just wanted to name that before I speak. So IFS is what we call a systemic model of therapy. I come from a family systems background. So when someone walks in my door, I'm looking at the whole picture. I'm looking at, have they had combat experience? What's their support system now? What's their background prior to combat or having been enlisted in the military? So I'm looking at like the whole thing. What's their health status? And all the things that are involved in the person rather than looking at a linear approach, right? So that's part of what attracted me to the model, is that I'm looking at the whole thing. The second piece about it is we recognize something called multiplicity of the mind, right? So when someone comes in with depression, for example, I'm looking at all aspects, like all parts of them that play into that. So they might have a part of them that criticizes them, and another part of them that's holding some, moral injury, and another part of them that's, dealing with it by drinking, right? So from the IFS perspective, we would call those different aspects parts, right? So they're parts of somebody's personality that have adapted to a strenuous situation, right? So we believe everybody is born with sort of a core self, right? And that parts of us, part of our personality, will adapt to situations that we're exposed to that are extreme in order to protect the basic who we are, right? So for example, if I'm kind of an aware, alert kind of a kid, I'm exposed to combat trauma, that part may develop what's called a hypervigilant role in my system, right? And part of our work is, as we work with using some of our protocols, is to help shift that, and that part will transform back to what it was intended, right? So we're working with people's systems to create a new balance. Yeah, so I'm just going to name that. And so we have like 3 categories of parts. There's the manager parts. Those are parts of us that sort of like keep things in control. Vulnerable stuff underneath, feeling bad about ourselves, feeling self-disgust, feeling shame, all of that is exiled. So that's another category of parts. And then we have, and I have a little chart back here, what we call firefighter parts. Those are the parts that are called the heroes of the system, and they jump in and help maintain stuff when the managers can't keep control, right? So that could be like drinking, sexual acting out, gambling, avoidant behaviors, you name it. There's any kind of behavior, act, soothe, etc., right? And I love IFS because most people, when they come into the rooms, are coming in with those parts in the lead, certainly not leading with that vulnerable stuff, right? So we work with that system to gain trust. And over time, as we gain trust, we can get to the stuff underneath to work with folks. So that's a very short synopsis. But here's a little chart. I'll move it a little closer for you to see all the different parts. And there's our core self, right? Which sounds a little esoteric. I think we're going to talk about that later. But if you think about, compassion and curiosity and confidence, those are some of our basic core values that exist in us initially before we're exposed to difficult situations. So I hope that was a good enough synopsis. If you really are interested, we have more level 1 trainings coming up. Yeah.
That's fine. And I'm thinking, Mary, that at least when I went through the training, they were talking about 2 primary therapeutic objectives. One, to have that whole system be self-led, and self in this context is kind of 180 out from what most people are talking about when they say self. They're thinking selfish, and this is more like some kind of core of goodness that's inherent in all human beings. Might be a little hard to see it in some people as opposed to others, but I kind of think of it as a diamond that's in every lump of coal. And then the second objective is to get the parts working together in a more fluid, effective way that's designed around the parts doing what they were supposed to be doing, or what they were born to do. Would you agree? Is that, or has the
I'd say
training changed
that,
since? Yeah.
No, that's it. Yeah. So the goal is to restore balance into the system. And what that would look like is the self would be in leadership of our system, our basic core, and the parts would be restored back to sort of a harmonious position. So if you think of the system that's unbalanced, right? there's no commander around and the troops are running wild, right? So, yeah. So, self becomes the commanding officer, basically, of our system, instead of having the troops running wild. Yeah. and that they all sort of begin to work and flow together like a team. Yeah. Instead of just having a couple of out here taking control of everything and not doing a great job. But they're just hanging on because that's all they can do to survive. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Dave, you were going to, I think, maybe lead off here saying something about why this particular model might be useful for the military ex-veterans PTSD.
Yeah, thank you, Stu. Definitely. Again, as I said, I've been working with trauma with veterans a good while before I was actually introduced to this model, and it's such a robust model. And kind of just to piggyback right on what Mary was saying there, I think for me personally, probably one of the things that I think IFS offers to the field, as much as anything else, is the idea that we actually do have this core self. There's ego state therapies, even Freud talked about the id and the superego and the ego. And, we kind of this multiplicity of mind has been around for a while, but self in particular, the fact that we actually, all of us have that at the core, I think has been what has been so transformational. And so then to your questions, Stu, in terms of its applicability to this population of working with veterans, I'm thinking specifically veterans who have experienced trauma, whether that's in combat or some other form of trauma, either in the military or even before. The idea that they have a core goodness is oftentimes absolutely, it blows them out of the water because they've so identified with their brokenness, right? And with their struggle to function, their struggle to readjust into the world, just the idea that at their core, there's actually a core goodness that's still there. And I love your idea, Stu, your metaphor of the diamond. Oftentimes, I think what we're doing as IFS practitioners is we're mining for that diamond. And then the second piece to that is once we find that core goodness in a person, then our job as therapists actually becomes quite, I think I'd call it facilitative, in that we are then facilitating the client's goodness, the client's self. That self is the most resourceful. It's their essence. It's so resourceful. It's creative. It's connected. I call it kind of the flame of the divine sometimes, to facilitate the client then bringing that self to their parts. And so for a veteran, oftentimes this will, I really appreciated what you said, Mary, that, they'll often identify this part as kind of their commander or who they want to be, their commander, a leader that is both very effective, but also is empathic, right? It's a leader that really has good decision-making skills, and at the same time has the space for the parts when they are stirred or when they are when they feel undone or afraid. And so so my strong belief is that this is the most effective model that's available for working with trauma. I'm trained in CBT, EMDR, and ACT, and CPT, all of that. And I was listening to the second panel this morning, and I really appreciated a lot of the words about the value of maybe not trying to be so siloed in our approach, where everyone's got their own, and we have these purists. Now, I'm a real believer in learning the model purely, I don't know if that's a word, but then having the internal ability to draw truths from these different models, to bring what is needed into the session. And so the final thing I'll just say, and then I'll shut up, is I think one of the most valuable things that, if I were to offer anything to today's conversation, is the value of the therapist being in self, finding your inner truth, your inner core wisdom, and then bringing that to the session. So even if I'm not, I have some veterans that are not open to the idea of being, a mosaic, having multiplicity. that doesn't change the fact that I'm working with my parts, even in the middle of the therapy. I'm staying in self because I know that self is going to be the most intuitive and capable of bringing to the therapy what is needed for the client.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad you're already into this thing about the self, because I've thought too, if you don't do anything other than change your way of thinking so that you think in terms of parts and self, um, you've already done a huge thing. And a veteran who can come in and say, part of me is angry, as
Right.
opposed to I am angry.
Yes.
That sort of slight wording change is a completely different notion than I am, meaning my whole identity is anger, or as we often hear, if you really got to know me, what you'd find out is the war beast inside of me rules everything.
Yes.
And we're right away thinking, well, that may be a part of you. You may have a part of you that could be a war beast, or could be violent, or could be whatever, but that's not your real identity. There's something else that's bigger than that. And I don't know, you run into people they're really proud of what they consider their identity to be. You know, they hit 700 home runs in their career or something, and we're trying to get across to them, well, that's great, but guess what? You're even more than that.
Right.
You know, there's if you really get to know what your true identity is, it's going to be even more joyful, more powerful, more loving, more caring than what you're putting there. And I don't know, we're probably going to have to double back some today. I'm thinking on this whole question of violence.
Mm.
You know, I already thought military commander. Nah, I don't think so. You know, the military commanders that I had weren't very good representations of what I'm thinking the self is. There might have been one or two that came close, but most of them were into a whole different idea about power. So let me see. I don't know, Mary, if you want to present any vignettes at this point, or what do you
I just
think?
want to say a little more about self, and
Yeah.
certainly that military commander is your own, and that would be what we would like a commander to be, right? And that would come
Ideally.
from that place of compassion and other places of interest. But I wanted to just say a little bit more about this bit on self, because a lot of people aren't going to buy into it. So what I do is I just talk about people having the ability to heal and change and reinforce the idea that it probably does feel hopeless for you right now, because you've been through a lot and it doesn't seem possible. And then I'll ask, sometimes if there's ever a moment that they have relief from their problem, where they feel in this place of, flow, or just feel at one with things that are going on around them. And that's kind of how I learned about self from Dick, because he talked about it, having that experience on the basketball court. And everybody can name an instant. It could be fishing, right? It could be sitting in nature. But in that moment, I'll say, well, then that tells me that you have it in you to heal. And that's how I bring that up, just using something really practical, because everybody has an exception to that misery that they're in, even if it's for a nanosecond. And that's what I tell them, even if it's a nanosecond, or petting their dog, or hanging out with their newborn or something. In those moments, that's when they have access to that self energy, right? So I point that out to folks so that they know that they do have that in them, right? Because it's a hard buy-in, especially for people that have lost spiritual connection, right? Yeah, so I'm just going to name that.
Mary, I just want to quickly say how much you just helped me right there. I'm working with a particular veteran right now, and that's not a thought that I had. That self could also be present in the exception to the misery. So thank you for that, and that's super practical for me.
Yeah, I think I would add to that too, that seems like most of our training in the school system and maybe even in life has to do with I'll just call it nature, meaning how how to survive in this jungle that we live in, and skills that we need to acquire, and how to make money, how to put food on the table, and all that stuff's important. At the same time, that nature is so much a part of our developmental learning, um, the spiritual part of it is also always there, I think, for everyone. And we might not get trained in it um,
Mm.
in quite the same way or to the same degree. I'm pretty sure we don't. And it kind of gets to the point where we don't even acknowledge some of those small things like petting your dog, but something happens there. There's a kind of, I am going to just say electricity for lack of some other word, and I've heard it. I remember some guy telling me, about what things were like for him when he was going 135 miles an hour on his motorcycle, that his world finally settled down. And there was a peace and a tranquility and a different kind of shift, if you will, in his consciousness. And that stuff's important. I'm not just talking about going to church on Sunday. A walk in the woods might be much, much more meaningful for some people. And the trick of it is to realize that that's also part of who you are, and that you can live from that sort of a center and that sort of perspective and use your skills and abilities in service of that. I guess we're maybe today calling it essential goodness that's inside each of us. And it's interesting to me that in some ways people who've been in combat really know a lot about that. And as an example, I would say like pretty much every combat group that I've ever been part of or been a leader of or whatever, they know this from the first evening when you sit down with everybody. There's a kind of a bonding
Mm-hmm.
and I would say even a love, if you would, for each other in the group. It's palpable, and it's almost immediately appreciated. A lot of the usual kind of nonsense that goes on with the forming of a group it's not even part of it. We just bypass that.
Yeah.
And so that kind of connection with each other and a realization that we're in this together is part of the military experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty powerful, pretty amazing. I could go on with other examples. I really thought it happened in 9/11. I was in New York not long after that, and I couldn't believe. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much everybody that I talked to said, I don't really know anybody that was in the Twin Towers, but somehow I felt connected to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, yeah, that's right. We're in this together, really. So
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to lean on that, and in IFS, make it the center. Um,
Yeah.
and in some ways, I think, Mary, your comment about overlap, in some ways it seems to me that every form of psychotherapy is intended in some way or other, although it's not usually stated as such, to put obstacles out of the way so we can get in touch with that essential goodness that's inside each of us. And we all have obstacles. We've all learned things that get in the way. Um, IFS maybe tends to address that a little more directly, but it seems to me like, well, that's all good therapies do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's stuff that gets in the way of us being who we truly are, if that doesn't sound too airheaded. So, being who we really are, at least in my own mind, there's a couple ways to get there. One is to see if we can get obstacles out of the way so the receiver can work properly, if you will, so that we can actually be aware of who we are. And if you get the receiver cleaned out, that kind of joy comes to the surface pretty naturally. On the other hand, if your receiver is all plugged up with who's carrying a gun today, and
Mm-hmm.
I might need to settle up a score here with this auto salesman who's lying to me, or thousands of other things. If you're all jammed up with that, it's hard to appreciate, I don't know, the beauty and goodness that's right in front of us. So that's one way to get there. The other way is, I'm thinking through various kinds of practices. Lately, meditation's been pretty big, and I notice mindfulness is creeping its way in, and yoga practices and so on. And I'm thinking that's a more direct access route, but it doesn't work if you've got all kinds of other stuff in the way. So really, in a way, you need both. IFS, it seems to me, is more the first one. Like, we're trying to figure out what parts think that they need to be in charge, what parts have taken over when they really don't need to, what parts have gotten themselves into some kind of extreme position and they're trying to run the whole show. So we're trying to help with that, and see if we can, restore that kind of balance.
Stu, I'm working with a combat veteran right now, and he's identified one of his most powerful parts as what he calls his point man. And so he's a Vietnam veteran, and so much of the experience for the infantrymen in Vietnam was to be in platoon size elements or smaller teams. And what's been so helpful is to notice how the point man isn't all of him. It's this part of him that gets out in front, that's looking for the traps, that's hyper vigilant, some of those hyper arousal part of the symptom cluster in PTSD. And what's been so helpful is to help him recognize that he's not only that. And one of the things that he does almost on a daily basis is he checks in with his point man, and just that differentiation. One of the things that I remember when I was up in Breckenridge with Dick Schwartz for a training that he did up there, one of the things is we were working through our practicing on with real material, which I really appreciated. But one of the things that I remember him saying is one of the most important questions that we can ask as an IFS therapist is, how do you feel towards this part of you, right? How do you feel towards that part? Because what that tells us as the practitioner is this client in self as they're coming to this part, or are they in another part? And so, and I know I'm probably, for many of you, this is, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but just thinking about folks who maybe are not as familiar with the model, kind of how this would look is, let's say I'm working with this man that I just described, right? And he's working with this point man. And I ask him, well, how do you feel towards this point man? He goes, man, I wish that guy would go away. He just continues to blow up my life. He continues to bring pain. He's not been helpful. And then I'll ask him, this is kind of my way of doing it. I'll say, well, where do you feel that part of you in your body, that irritation? And he'll, identify a spot, and I'll say, can you check in with that part? And let's just see if that part, just for right now, is willing to kind of step back and give us some room to approach this point man with a little bit of grace and a little bit of room. And so he'll go inside, so to speak, and check in with that part. And that part will step back. And then I'll ask, so now that you're with the point man again, how are you feeling? And the moment curiosity shows up, right? I'm just like, what's going on with him? Or he's so tired, and I'm starting to pick up that the client has some empathy or some compassion for this part. I can trust at that point that the client is in this place of self. There's more self energy. It is very esoteric, like Mary, like you were saying, Mary, but there's more room. There feels like there's more room, more grace. I think I'll use that word. And when that's true, then that's when we can start facilitating the client witnessing and accompanying this point man that's stirred up, and just let the point man tell his story. Like, yeah, that was Costco kicked my butt, man. There was just so much chaos, and I just want to go jump in a foxhole somewhere. And and so again, we move into the facilitative role of bringing client self to client part. And I guess what made me think about this was you were talking about removing obstacles, Stu. I feel like some of the obstacles that tend to get in the way are internal obstacles, those other parts that are polarized with maybe some of these exiles that are inside of us. Yeah.
I was just thinking, as you were talking, David, and mentioning the point man, of both the internal and external pressures that arise from being in that role. I'm actually going to share a personal vignette. So my former husband, we were together for more than 25 years. So he actually was a LERP in Vietnam. And so I didn't really understand the impact of, interestingly enough, I think it was just so embedded in my subconscious, the impact on the person and the family as a whole. So we would go out as a family unit and he'd be walking way ahead of us. And I'd be back here with the kids carrying everything. And so he had all this pressure on him to be the point man. And I never understood that. I thought he was just, I had a part saying, oh my God, he's abandoning me, leaving me holding the bag, kind of thing. But he was up there like doing his role, and then one day I understood the point man, what he was doing. He was like trying to protect us, right? And it occurred to me that maybe this is why, we can't go to the movies. We can only sit in the PTSD seat when we go out to eat. And we have to spend a lot of time at home, like, sort of was resupplying, because, it's a lot of pressure out there, and, some of that work that I've done is not only with, the veteran, but also how it's impacted the people around them and how they're interacting. Because if they're interacting in a negative way, that's just increasing the pressure on the person and making it more difficult for them to let go of those roles they're in,
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate you bringing that out, because that's a big piece for a lot of folks. It's not comfortable to be out there. And yeah. So if we have an understanding of why that's happening, it really helps shift the system.
I don't know if you've had the opportunity, you probably have, but in Dick Schwartz's book, You Are the One You've Been Waiting For, it talks about IFS with couples, right? And as I was making my way through that book, I actually did the audio version of that. And one of the things I remember about that is the value of having the spouse, having the partner in the room, even while maybe some individual IFS work is happening with one of the partners. And I'm just thinking about some of the IFS work that I do with couples, and the compassion, the self that shows up in the partner when they see that really what's driving that behavior that you were just talking about, Mary, is this really vulnerable, scared part that's just trying to do his best and trying to protect the family. And it's not abandonment, and so such value. That's one of the things I love about the Vet Center program. It's one of the places in the VA, if not the only place, I'm not sure, where we're able to do just ongoing couples and family therapy, actually in a VHA context. But the compassion that comes up, the self that enters the room, not just from client or from therapist, but also from family member, and the understanding that comes with that. So yeah.
That's an important piece of the work, the internal work, and then the working with the coupleship or the family system, because veterans go back out there and they're getting more flack from the parts of their partners and other family members. And if they can, that it's different. If I explain to somebody, then they feel like I'm on the side of the veteran. But if we're witnessing, like you were talking about, David, it's way more powerful, because now they're making an emotional connection, and I believe that that's an essential piece to recovery for folks, yeah. And it was definitely missing, for us. I had no idea of any of this, when I was 22 years old.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Mary, I appreciate what you said about taking it with them. And, one of my favorite things about this model in particular is that it is the very antithesis of fostering dependence upon the therapist. We're teaching the client to find self and to operate from this place of self. And then when we're also able to do this in a family context or in a couples context, they leave out of here and they become more and more self-led, literally, and eventually are ready to just spread their wings and get on out there and kind of face life on life's terms. So yeah.
And it's a lot nicer than ending up all alone in your old age.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, Mary, absolutely.
I want to just briefly come back to the importance of that question, Dave, of how do you feel towards whatever part it is. And maybe we'll spend some more time a little bit later talking about the question of how do you help people recognize that they have a self. I think all three of us have alluded to some different ideas already about that, but One of the ways you help them, I think, is by asking that question. So if somebody's thinking that what I really am is an angry dude, and you then ask, well, how do you feel towards that anger?
Right.
That forces them, in a sense, to shift out of the anger in order
Right.
to come at it from a different perspective.
Yes.
And that's very useful no matter what form of therapy you're using. You can ask somebody a question like that. How do you feel towards the sadness? And I don't know, I initially was more of a, I don't know, psychodynamic, psychotherapist
Yeah.
kind of training, and ended up spending a lot of time with people talking about, and
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then somewhere in there I ran into a more Gestalt type orientation, and I thought, wow, we're really getting better results by talking to whatever it is, rather than talking about it. And at this point in my life, I wouldn't want to go back to that. It does happen every now and then that, for one reason or another, we talk about, but talking to is so much more powerful, and it, without ever saying anything about self or anything else to the client, they're almost forced to at least assume some different perspective. It may not be self yet. We may have to do some other things before it gets there, but they have to shift out of
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is in order to see how do they feel towards it.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for bringing that up. Oh, sorry.
No, please, Mary, please.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this person I was working with had been in a big blast in Afghanistan and severely injured. And when the first time I met them, they were could barely come to my office because everywhere they saw the enemy, they had to drive on a back road. It was really anxiety provoking. And they were just getting like flashbacks. So we ended up, not obviously the first session, but we ended up working with that part. And when I asked, how do you feel towards the part, it was completely different. We could have interpreted the part and talked about it. But as they created a relationship with that part, they began to understand this part was trying to keep them safe, right? And after we created a relationship and did some work with it, that part really dialed down for this person. If we had just been
Yes.
sitting around interpreting it and all that, it would still be in full force.
Yes. Very similar situation in a veteran that I worked with as their relationship improved with what they called their monster. And Stu, I really appreciated your term war beast. Man, so many of the veterans I've worked with have and this starts to get to some of that moral injury stuff, but somehow this client will say, somehow I was able to commit these atrocities. And what does that say about me as a person? And so that moral injury and that piece. So as soon as they can kind of improve their relationship with that war beast, what happened with this one veteran that I'm thinking about is and it was a slow process, but over time, as that relationship improved between self and the war beast, it began to transform and it began to show its true nature. That's this part that it took on the form of this hideous evil monster. It was quite. So we did some of those techniques that we learned about as far as, maybe putting some bulletproof glass between the part and self. But then as that part began to show its true nature, it was a scared little guy that took on the trauma and the client's compassion for that scared little part was profound and was able to comfort that part and then reintegrate that part, which so many models talk about reintegration. It was no longer exiled. Then that part was able to take on a less radical role as we unburdened it and rescued it. So, yeah, Toufic, I see you that question and answer, but I don't know how to look at that. So I'm wondering if there's some questions that are out there that we can tackle. Stu, can you see that?
Yeah, so we got one here from Ray Mount, who wants to point out that the military training is focused on a part, that might be a warrior part,
Yes.
and it's trying to teach it some skills in, I don't know, everything from maintain equipment to how to inflict death. So that's a part. And actually, Jonathan Shea writes a good bit about it. He calls it the berserker,
Yes.
and that's when it's like, that's the same thing as the war beast, I think, when it's fully engaged. And I remember we used to tell guys, yeah, it's like losing control in order to gain control, but it's quite powerful. I don't know if you've not done that before. You should give it a shot, sometime or other, just to see.
You go berserk? Is that what you're saying, Stu?
What's that?
You're saying we should try going berserk every now and then, just like.
I think so.
Oh.
Yeah, it's aligned somewhere in there in a good way with just howl at the moon, But yeah, there's a place for what it looks like when you completely lose control. In the military, you kind of learn how to lose control, but not really. It sure looks like you've lost control. So if that's all you do, you're really not at your best. I'm sure every boxer knows that. But anyway, I think Ray's right. So the military offers the training for a part, but it's really not at the core at all. I mean, we've been saying that a good bit here. And then let me see, Lauren Cooper wants us to come back more to some veteran who carries responsibility for a subordinate's death that was killed in combat, and that sort of, I think, moves us more towards moral injury in a way. But I don't know. We could either deal with that one right now if you guys want, or we could kind of come back to it.
Can I say a quick piece back to Ray's question?
Yeah.
Ray, I appreciate that question very much. And one of the things that I think has been very valuable for me, and I didn't get this right away, even after level 2, for some reason, it hadn't sunk in. Just the idea that a part is not its role. A part is not its skill set even necessarily. It has its own essence in a way. And I know this is starting to go down the rabbit hole a little bit, but even parts have self-energy. And so that those parts, I've got a real part of me that not just through basic training, but through other courses I took, and then also in my actual experience, out in performing my duties, that reinforced that training and reinforced that part. And that part got really big and very, very powerful and had influence. And it just, it took over. It blended with me for large portions of my time in uniform. And what can be so transformative is to, first of all, to help the client understand that, just what I just said, that yes, you have that part of you, and that part of you, even that part, is more than just the military training. Like that might, and so I have a client that I've worked with on that, and he's noticed that this part, it went from being just this very rigid part of him that just like he ran his house the way he ran his troops, to being more of what he would describe as a dutiful part. He's very duty oriented and mission oriented. And so then once that part was able to, it's still got those same basic personality structures of that part was then able to hear his new mission. And the new mission, as assigned by self, was to be that father that your kids need. And what does that look like? He got into parenting courses, and he's very mission oriented. And so just the bottom line, that the part isn't their role. They take on these roles because that's what gets trained. That's how we navigate that particular situation. It's almost like unburdening in a way, but I also see it as a little bit more nuanced than that. It's also maybe redefining. Even parts have their identity. Stu, you were talking about, identity. Different parts have their own identity, but even that is not their true essence. So I just wanted to say a piece on that. And then I don't remember what that next question was, but anyway.
If it's okay, I'd like to add just a little bit more on that as well. I was just, as you were talking, thinking about, that training also can bring an identity to people who, entered the military really not knowing who they were, having had a lot of trauma prior to that. And I was just thinking of a couple of people I worked with. One was a dog handler for like 10 years, doing various contract work. And whenever they came home, they fell into a depression because they had had become their identity, And same with some other folks I've worked with. It offered a sense of security to what we call the exiles that were already there before military. And the letting go of it is really scary until that's healed, right? So that's why some people can't let go of that role at home of having to run it like, they run their military position and all that. They have to treat their family like the troops, or they have to have everything like boom, boom, boom. Because letting go, it can be really hard until you've healed what's underneath that. So I just wanted to name that. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that points to, I don't know, another thing that I kind of like about IFS that I'm not sure is the case with a number of other therapies, that it's, it's really not symptom focused, and so I think, Dave, you were saying something about silos or whatever, but I assume you were talking about symptoms in a way there. And so you can get into, I think, what you're talking about, Mary, the family history. If you are tracking different parts, it's going to take you there. If it's, and that's true of a lot of things that, I think another thing that's related to this with IFS is it can move into the unconscious sort of system without us even ever having to talk about that, and in psychodynamic psychotherapy, you get there more by listening to metaphor and trying to bring that more to the surface. But with IFS and parts work, if you can get somebody talking to a part, the part will tell you all this stuff. And I know I was working with somebody yesterday who she was having like a lot of trouble understanding how come her system just shut down, and then she didn't have a voice anymore, and that was really inappropriate for what she's trying to do these days. And so when we got to that part and we talked to that part, it was able to explain that whole thing. It didn't want to explain it to her until we had sort of set up a safe kind of environment for it to do that. But I thought that's really intriguing. Because in a different form of therapy, you might still get to that, but I just think it would be harder. And you don't have to lead people at all with this. They'll tell you. The part will speak. So anyway, I think that stuff's pretty cool. We have a video out there. I think it's called Trauma Behind Rage or something like that, or Rage Behind. Yeah, Trauma Behind Rage.
Trauma Behind the Rage. Yeah.
Yeah, and in that, so this individual who's a Marine ends up taking his Marine Corps uniform out to a canyon somewhere and burying it, or I don't remember exactly what he did with it, but what I was going to underline here is, so we get the metaphor. We're not trying to change any particular thought or feeling or behavior. It's all summed up, in a story that he tells basically. And I thought, yeah, that's pretty cool. We can incorporate a lot of stuff with a story or with a metaphor, then we don't really have to take it apart into, well, is that a feeling or is it a thought or is it a behavior or what is it? It seems to me like there's just a more natural flow. And people are more comfortable presenting things in that way too, I think. So, I'm just rambling on about it, and there's another facet of IFS I like.
So we're doing a reconsolidation process, right? And just to back up a little bit, I like the idea of, looking at the problem systemically, and it doesn't necessarily mean the external family, but looking with the inner system. If we're working with, say the person has like firefighter of like, super drinking problem, and we just deal with the symptom of drinking, it's going to be like whack-a-mole. Now another part comes up. I'm in the TV all day with the remote, right? But in IFS, if we can get to what's underneath it, and do some of that reconsolidation, now the person doesn't have to be in the TV all day too, all these behaviors are meant to suppress, the war beast that we're talking about, right? To keep that under control, to keep the environment under control. And if we just take away one symptom and we haven't resolved the underlying issue, another symptom is going to come up to, maintain the status quo, right? So I love the idea of looking at the full picture.
Yeah.
Agreed.
What's happening in here.
And that underlying issue, or one of the things that I've noticed that I love about this model as well. I don't know if you guys remember, I'm totally going to age myself, but the old encyclopedias where you'd have like an anatomy, and you could like peel one piece of cellophane at a time, and then you'd see the next system. Man, I have noticed this time and again in doing IFS work. When I'm working with a particular exile, that exile has layers that go back in time. And as healing happens, it almost happens three-dimensionally, backwards in time. So many of our, back to talking about this particular population of veterans, military members, so many folks that I've worked with actually entered the military to escape some very difficult family dynamics. And so, as you were saying, Mary, they came into the military with some pre-existing trauma and some pre-existing injuries. And so as we do the work that maybe will present as something that happened in their military experience, that part will begin to speak to, one of my favorite questions in the IFS protocol is, when did this part first take on this role? Or does this part hold a particular memory of when it really had to kind of adopt this way of functioning? And so consistently, these parts are so young. And then, of course, so then our clients came into the military with their parts largely already arranged in this way. And so, yeah, it definitely, and I love, Stu, what you said about the parts can just kind of speak for themselves. A lot of times I find myself saying, don't think for the part, let the part tell you. Most of my clients, many of my clients are very brilliant, and they have their own inner analyst, and it usually exists up in the head. They'll usually say, yeah, I feel it up here. That will try to get in and interpret the session or analyze what's going on. And I have that part too. That's really fascinated with human behavior. And one of the things that Dick Schwartz talks about a lot is how parts bring up parts, right? So if I don't watch out, and if I'm not in self, I'll have a client that's in this place of analyzing, oh, what does that mean? And where did this come from? My analyst will come up. And so what I'll find myself doing is first helping hey, let's try to just kind of come back to self. And then I'll encourage the client, it sounds like that analyst part that we've identified before is kind of stepping in. Would that part be willing to step back so that we can just be with this other part? And we'll check in later with that analyst and see how that part of you's doing. Then we go back to just witnessing that part, telling its story of what happened in the military, what happened back in the earlier time. And then part of the beauty of this model then is we have these amazing tools to, first of all, witness that part and what that part experienced, but then to rescue that part, help that part unburden, and to be resourced and take on maybe new roles and renegotiation within the client's system. It's such a robust and nuanced model.
I wonder if we could, I was trying to look at some of the question and answers. I wonder if we could go back. I don't think we quite finished with Lauren Cooper's question about a veteran who feels responsible for a subordinate's death, and that he has to think about the death, I guess, every day, because if he doesn't, that would be leaving somebody behind. And does she say, I want to tell the private in heaven I thought about him every day. That's what the veteran.
Can I jump on that one real quick?
Sure.
Can I jump on that one?
Please,
so I
please
have a Marine Corps infantry officer that has this exact. That's a part of his that burden of leadership. And in IFS, in doing IFS work with him, he, in his mind's eye, as he was accompanying his younger self, this lieutenant, they walked into the medical tent where these two Marines had been burned to death, right? And as he stood there, and this stuff just shows up. It's a lot like EMDR, where it'll just show up as it needs to, right? And this brings me emotion just talking about it. This young lieutenant, as he's looking at his men, watched their spirits rise up out of those bodies, and they both looked at the LT, looked at the lieutenant, and said, "We are okay, Lieutenant. This was not your fault, and we are okay." And then he watched them ascend. This happened in his mind's eye. His night sweat stopped. So many of his PTS symptoms went way down, and he went and he got a plaque that has the quote of what his men said to him in that IFS session, and he has that plaque hanging in his office. And so when I heard this particular question, that's what shows up for me is we have the ability. I'm not even sure what the IFS term is, and Mary, you can certainly speak to this, but I call it revisiting the memory. So we'll revisit the memory, but then self will help guide that younger part through a process of healing, and it just intuitively knows what to do. And intuitively, the client with his younger self went into that medical tent, and this amazing, beautiful spiritual thing happened.
Well, I think people are surprised at the, thank you for that story. It was really beautiful and meaningful. And I do believe that these experiences are healed through this inner wisdom and this spiritual connection that we have. And people are surprised at that can happen. Yeah. And I believe that from what I've experienced, that folks don't want to let go of those memories because either the people will be forgotten or the situation will be forgotten. And when they come to realize that there's a different way to do it, like this person commemorated with a plaque, then and they have permission to let go of it from the situation, that it shifts internally. And that's something that can't happen through cognitive logical approach to the work.
Yeah. Mary, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I'll tell you something that happens a lot in working with combat veterans in particular is they'll have this dutiful part that we're at the point in the work where we're ready to rescue this part, and they won't leave. They don't want to leave because they don't want to leave their troops, right? And so sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. But one of the things that has worked is then the client will then, as they are, so I'll say, as you are now, is this 72-year-old person who knows that the war is over, who knows that you made it through that knows that this is a memory, it's not current. Can that part speak to your part and let him see that it's you? And so I have them make eye contact with that inner, Lance Corporal or whoever it is that we're working with, and they'll make eye contact. And so oftentimes, I don't know how this works, why this is true, but they'll reach out and they'll just grab their shoulders. It's this interesting, almost universal thing that happens, or they'll put a hand on the shoulder, almost in this guide, and just say, we've already made it through. You already took care of your troops. And usually there's this moment, and then there's kind of this surrender. And then especially for the Vietnam veterans, then what we'll usually do is we'll do a medevac, and a helicopter will show up, and just gets me.
Thank you.
So he puts this Lance Corporal on the Bird, flies him home, and brings him into the room with us. And I just have to tell you, I know I'm just completely biased and sold out to this model, but I just have never experienced anything like that in any other model. And I think we're wired for story, right? We're wired for story. And so the beautiful thing about this model is as they spend time with this part of them, the story unfolds and it just sticks. The work sticks. They remember this. And so, yeah, it's beautiful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a great story, Dave. And Lauren, I don't know you, but I don't think there's anything wrong with bringing people along with you after they're dead. Um,
Yes.
Now, I'm not sure your client may not like the way that's going, and then if it were me, I'd be trying to reframe it. But for some reason, I'm thinking about I had this client. I haven't seen her in a number of years, but she once asked me, and she's about 20, I guess, if we could be friends for life. You know, and I felt very honored by that. I told her, of course we can. But I was also thinking to myself, look, I'm not going to be here for your whole life. Like I'm probably leaving pretty soon, and and at the same time, I feel like as we're sitting here talking today, I'm not here by myself. I brought some people with me, and the trick is to, I think, be able to remember them in a good way, as they would want to be remembered. These are people who are really close to me, and I don't have any intention of giving them up.
Right.
But I'm not gonna, like a lot of combat vets are remembering somebody who was blown to smithereens,
Yeah.
as their last encounter. I try to get them out of that, and
Yeah.
let's think about this in a different way, about the good times you people had together, or what you shared with each other, and how does your friend want to be remembered. And um, maybe they need to have a conversation with a friend, and that can easily be part of IFS too. That's also possible with other therapies for sure, and frequently used. So
That's
anyway, that's
powerful.
interesting thinking about all that.
Yeah, asking how the person would like to be remembered, and does that person really want you to be thinking about that situation in which they were blown up over and over again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I worked with
Yeah.
a veteran who had made a pact with his best friend, and they were in the same unit, and that if one of them got badly burned, uh, this is going to be hard. This is going to be hard, but I think part of this panel is talking about hard stuff, right? They made a pact that if someone was badly burned, that the other would finish that person off. And this happened to this veteran, and he finally came forward with that. And it was a very similar experience in IFS,
Mm-hmm.
in that this other his friend, who he had to, based on the pact that they had made, he ended his life, put him, let him out of his misery as per the pact. When he went back to this, and so then the veteran, the client, again, put his arms around this younger soldier that was about to do this. One of the things we did, and this was an intuitive thing, I think came from me, is I said, you've got a remote control, and we can slow this way down. We can slow this. We can go scene by scene, and we can pause it. But what it sounds like is that this part of you does not want to be alone through this, because he had to do this awful thing alone. So just scene by scene went through it, and then got on the other side of it, and we were able to, it was a very similar situation where he watched this veteran's spirit. The same thing happened. He watched the veteran's spirit float out of the body, smiled at him, and then went on. And right after that session, my veteran this client went on vacation to Hawaii. And the nickname of this young man that passed away that day was Turtle. And the client came back from this Hawaiian vacation, and he says, Dave, you would not believe how many turtles I saw on this vacation. And so he literally brought one of the turtles and he gave it to me. This was a turtle in the airport in Pearl Harbor. So this is Turtle. And so now he's able to remember. And so he brought Turtle to his safe place, which is on a deck overlooking this beautiful lake. And so he hangs out there with Turtle. He hangs out with Pineapple, and his younger part named Soapy. Those parts just hang out on the deck, and these are people who have passed away. But in IFS, it's just such a beautiful way that they can, be together. Such healing.
Yeah, and that's offering strength.
Thank you for sharing. That was gorgeous.
Yeah, inspirational, not degrading or down or depressing at all.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, and there's no arguing with this, yeah, I'm not going to disparage other models, but IFS has opened up vistas that I have not experienced in other models. So, yeah.
Yeah, we got another quick
think we can
question
go-
here. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Go ahead.
Question in regards to leadership from Francisco. I did leadership skills while I was in the Army. I'm having a tough time applying these skills with my family. Yeah, no kidding, Francisco. So, I'm just thinking, I'm remembering some sergeant that ran his family like it was his platoon, and I'm also thinking of, I don't know how many people I've talked to, so that what they learned in the military was how to be invulnerable, and it's kind of the opposite of what somebody like Brene Brown would advocate, so intimacy requires vulnerability and exposing yourself in ways that you really wouldn't want to do in the military, especially you went with the enemy, for goodness sake, to realize where your vulnerabilities are. So military teaches you, I think for the most part, how to be pretty hard and pretty tough. Now you can't quite do that all the time with your own men. That's a little different, but that's hard for people to get with. And I guess what I'm thinking about your question is, so you went through the military leadership training program, but your kids probably didn't. So they gotta understand what you're doing, and um, and I'm pretty sure neither is your wife. So it really requires, I think, like a reorientation. And then you've said here, like, I'm at home, I want to totally relax at home, and I'm trying to figure that out. Like, how do we do that? And my thoughts on that are basically that it takes some real trust and work, but there are ways to be still a leader in your family and to be relaxed. So they're not incompatible. I believe that too about most creative work. I'm pretty big on humor, but it took me a long darn time to be able to bring that into therapy, because I was always trying to muscle my way through everything. In IFS, you don't have to muscle your way, you just need to get out of the way.
Yes.
So I don't know, it's a different approach, and I think it's pretty cool that you asked that question. To me, that says, all right, he's leaning in the right direction.
I'd like to say something about that.
Yeah, go for it.
I was just thinking, not only does it interfere with the family, but sometimes it actually shows up in your military work as well, that maybe there's too much of that going on. And so my work with that part would be, to have the person really ask the part, what is concerned would happen if it relaxed a little bit, rather than telling some other side of me, I really should relax, I should do this and that. That's the shoulds, right? But it doesn't mean that it's going to get that place inside of me to relax. So I would want to know from that actual part itself what it would need to have happen in order to relax. So that's a solution. I could sit there for 2-3 years, trying to guess what might be helpful. This is really a shortcut into it, and so that would be my idea, is to be curious about what is this part's role, and why is it showing up in the family as well, and how is it working, and what does it need in order to not be so strong in the person's system, So again, the wisdom is coming from the person, right? People are shocked at how much wisdom there is in there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at stuff that we said we might talk about, and I've got here, so we haven't really gone to the moral injury thing. We haven't said anything yet about therapist burnout. And and I don't know, another point of interest for me anyway is, so all three of us are talking a lot about the self, but some people believe they don't even have one, and usually then they're not sure if anybody else does either. And how do we actually go about trying to get people in touch with that? Mary, you gave an example or two, and we've touched on it, but I think it's still a really valid question. You know, do people really have something called a self? How do we know? But anyway, so I don't know if those three things, we only have a few minutes left. What do you guys want to go to?
I would love
Well,
to talk about more. Yep, go ahead, Mary.
I could do a very quick bit on the therapist parts, and then you might want to do the moral injury.
Yes, sounds
Won't
good.
take me that long. Yeah.
Sure.
Because I think the moral injury is really deep, and we want to give that. So I'll name that we have a lot of ways to work with our own parts as the clinician, and I think that's another powerful paradigm shift. We talk a lot about the self of the therapist and other models, but we actually have ways to work with our own parts so we can be more self-led. And because we can work that way, it decreases the amount of burnout that we would experience. We just finished this training, and I got some feedback from some folks that actually they were feeling really burned out in their job and didn't know if they could continue. And after learning the model, have found a new way to work and feel way energized and like really recommitted to their role because they were able to address some of that burnout stuff that's happening. Yeah. So we have a lot of ways to work with that. And it's a big piece of the work. If we don't do anything else different in our work with with veterans, working our parts creates a huge shift in our work with veterans and how they respond to us. So, yeah. So I'll turn it over around the moral injury piece.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Mary. So, moral injury, that there's so much, as I'm sure most of the folks who are watching today, that has really become something that's talked about a lot more. And I'm so glad, when I cut my teeth in the early 90s and, we just did not touch anything around spirituality or moral injury. And it's so good that conversation is happening. So I feel kind of like in the second session, moral injury, it's one of those things that's kind of, it's defined subjectively. For me, what I think about a lot with moral injury, at least what I see a lot in the work that I do, it typically is when either the client has either witnessed or even participated in what the client believes is a moral transgression, some sort of something that went against the client's deep sense of what is right and what is wrong. One of the things that I think doesn't get talked about often is when in combat, it is often true, at least this is my experience in the work that I've done, that that part takes over, kind of that part back to the one question regarding this part that gets reinforced in basic training and maybe in, School of Infantry and all of that. There's a part that really does blend in, right, and take over. And part of that is kind of a loss of our own humanity. And so when we lose our humanity, when we lose touch from that, my brother talks, my brother's an Army psychologist, and he talks about how we have this, when we go limbic, we actually kind of blow our top. We lose that prefrontal cortex, that part of us that holds our morals, that holds our what is right and wrong oftentimes. And we just move into this limbic place. Well, from that limbic place, that part of us that is so about survival and has lost touch with humanity and maybe is on a vengeance because of something that just happened to a comrade. I have had a number of veterans that have done things that they look back on now that they're back home and they re-engage their humanity and they look back at what they did. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, about that war beast or that monster. And then there's so much shame around that. You want to talk about an exile. This isn't just an exile that's in the cellar. This is an exile that's under the floor in the cellar. And so it's so often that I just can't even tell you how many times that I've worked with a veteran for years before they finally peel the floorboards. There's enough safety that they'll actually peel the floorboards off the cellar and say, okay, I'm at a point where I've seen how it works to witness. I need to say this piece. And so in terms of moral injury, there's something that I wanted to bring up, and it's really around spirituality. Many of our clients, even if they're no longer practicing or even have a belief system that's currently this way, they maybe grew up with some sort of a faith or somewhere along the way. And what I will often ask in the work is there somebody spiritual? Is there someone that can also be here with you as you do this work? And Jesus shows up often. A priest will show up, a rabbi, a lion has showed up a number of times, just this lion that the veteran will just hold on to the lion's mane. There's something, so that's another piece that I appreciate about IFS is we can also invite resources, other participants in the work. And very much back to that video with that Marine that was able to fold up his uniform and take it to someplace sacred. Moral injury, I feel, again, there is not a model akin to IFS to really work with that moral injury and to allow some, I think I'm going to use the word absolution. I'm no theologian, but I think that is kind of an idea of somehow a way of achieving some forgiveness. I'm working with a young lady that just the other day was working on some moral injury. Jesus showed up and they went to a river and Jesus baptized her. And as she was underwater, that pain of that and that shame, the shame, she just felt it, those molecules of that shame washing out of her body, and she came up fresh and clean. And she was literally that evening after seeing me in session, she birthed a child. She was pregnant and she was about to have birth, but she was so cut off from her own body from that shame. And it was so wonderful to have done that work. And she was able to then be fully present for this new baby that came into her life. So I believe IFS is a wonderful model for moral injury. And it's something that needs to be talked about. I hope we continue to have this conversation about moral injury.
Thank you for bringing that up, David. The thing I've heard come from folks around moral injury is that deep down inside, they feel like they're evil, that they were this evil person. And that comes from a spiritual place as well. And really, the only way to really let go of it is through this kind of spiritual experience. And IFS does offer this. It can take people years, as you were mentioning, to get ready to be there, though, because people will enter our room feeling spiritually bereft, in many cases, like they've been forgotten, they were the bad ones, they don't believe in that stuff anymore. Right. And the power of the model is that we don't impose that on people, but they come to it on their own in the right moment. And that's what creates the healing. And it really is, we can offer them to bring in any kind of guide that they need, any spiritual guide at the right time to create that ultimate healing that they probably never believed was possible for them, that they were going to go to their last day holding the sense of being evil when they're not.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's amazing how that then manifests in the real world. I had a Vietnam veteran back when I was in Reno, down at that vet center, who was chronically suicidal, and he had moral injury. And he finally told me about something very egregious that he did. But just to be able to bear witness to that and to find that inner absolution, and that suicidality went way down. Real quick word about group. I'm a real fan of group. Stu, I appreciated what you said in the last session. Panel number 2 about group. And one of the things I appreciate about the Vet Center program is how many groups we do. IFS in group is a thing, and it's beautiful. Right before this panel, I had a group that I call Muddy Boots. And it's a group of Vietnam combat veterans, and they all see me also individually doing IFS work. So what that really does is then it enters into the group, and they're able to talk about their parts in the middle of the group discussion, and it just really enriches that conversation. So, yeah.
I just wanted to add in one thing about a moral injury. Well, maybe 2 things. One is that the DSM doesn't talk about it at all, really, and that's too bad. I think it'll change the next edition. So most of the people we talk to have done some things, or like you said, they either witnessed them or participated in them that are pretty horrendous. So if we have a chance to talk to the part that feels guilty or feels upset, and we're trying to figure out, well, what is it trying to do for you? Well, it's trying to make you a better person, and um, that's the beginning, it seems to me, of them recognizing that the thing is well intended, and it's not an indication of evil. It's actually the opposite, even though they may come in feeling like it is an indication of evil. But really, it's gotten carried away with telling them how bad whatever it was really was. And there's other things that can be done with respect to recognition of the good. And usually, I mean, my experience with like guilt and that sort of thing is it's trying to make sure this never happens again.
Right.
And maybe it might be thinking if I punish you enough,
Right.
you won't ever do it again. But
Yep.
yeah, we can work our way through that with, I think, the tools that IFS provides.
Right.
And it's pretty fascinating to watch and pretty beautiful, has been my experience. And I wish to goodness I had known about this before. I'm thinking of one client in particular where I just didn't know what to do. And if I had known IFS at the time, I would have known what to do.
Yes.
So
Agreed.
we only got a
I,
couple minutes left, and is there anything that you guys, each of you, would want to say in summary, or
I just want to add
would
one little more
please?
thing around the moral injury. IFS is a non-pathologizing approach, and the act of pathologizing someone to begin with feeds into the idea that I'm a broken, defective person. So I believe that just this non-pathologizing approach begins to set the stage for healing moral injury, because we're leading with the idea that this person is not broken, they're not defective, that they've adjusted in a way to an environment that was out of the norm, right? So I just wanted to name that. I think that's a really important piece to take away. Yeah.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, just a couple pieces. First of all, one of the things that was the most helpful thing I ever heard in an IFS training, again, this was from the founder, Dick Schwartz, is he said, don't be afraid to just start using parts language, even if you're not yet trained, just to enter into the idea of hey, these are, this is a part of you. It sounds like a part of you is feeling this way, but yet there's another part. It's just amazing how just that alone opens up a door for another way to really work with our clients. And then the second piece is I just want to end with just a shout out to all of you all that are in this field. I was listening to an article the other day that said that, on the heels of this pandemic, that we are now in the midst of a mental health pandemic. And so, we ourselves are kind of in the trenches. We're in the war zone. And so just the value of taking good care of us cannot be overemphasized. So I just commend, I can't see you guys at all, whoever's in here, but I just thank you for being in this field. Thank you for doing the work. Thank you for that hard client that you're working with right now, that you're in the trenches with them where nobody else is. And I just commend you for that. And I just wish you lots of love and self energy. And it's just been such a privilege to be with you today.
Yeah, and for me, like, yeah, this is a little bit crazy to not be able to see you guys. So, I don't know. I've done some teaching, not a lot, but enough. And, when you can see how people are reacting, it kind of gives you an idea about, do you need to provoke them, or do you need to get them to calm down, or, what should you do? But I have no sense of like what's happening other than the little bit of feedback around the Q&A. And so anyway, thanks for hanging in. Thanks for showing up. I hope this has been encouraging and useful. I've wondered myself a few times while the three of us were talking if we're not just rattling on too much, because I'm having a good time, but I don't know. I don't know if you guys are, so I hope you are. And particularly, I mean, in a week here, we're into Christmas, and I don't know. I'm one of those that loves this time of year, and the reason is because I think there's a particular opportunity here for, I don't know, engaging the spirit in a way that's important. I know I'm not enough. I know I'm inadequate. I know all of that stuff, actually quite well. But at this time of year, if you can open up your heart and you know, let in the truth, the goodness, the wonder, a crazy kind of thing happens. And that's my wish for all of you. And I also want to express my appreciation to you, Mary, and you, Dave, for showing up here, and you too, Toufic, even though they can't see you, and Luke. But anyway, thanks for doing this. One person asks if we're going to do this again. No, never. So you're on your own, buddy.
Stu, I'm just aware Mary didn't get a chance to summarize. I had that
Oh, okay,
opportunity
sure.
a
I'm
moment
sorry.
ago.
Yeah, I know, I'm aware that we're out of time, but I just wanted to thank you all for participating, and I hope this, if you're not yet trained in IFS, has piqued your interest. It's life transforming, and it's just such a great gift to be able to offer your clients. So just wishing you all the best. Thanks for being here. Yeah.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Thanks all.
Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday, and Happy New Year. Yeah.